Welcome everyone today to another episode of Brain Ideas, program of the Invisible Disabilities Association. I'm Wayne Connell, founder and CEO of IDA. We are passionate about providing awareness that invisible disabilities, illness, and pain are very real. Our mission is to encourage and educate and connect people and organizations touched by illness, pain, and disability around the globe. Envision with us a world where people living with illness, pain, and disability will be invisible no more. IDA is about changing the way the world sees disabilities. And we're so excited today to launch a new season of Brain Ideas on the Neuro Invisible. Brain Ideas is all about the brain, and Ideas is invisible disabilities education, awareness, and support. And now I want to introduce you to my great friend and longtime IDA supporter who will be our host for Brain Ideas Season 3, Tim Goldstein. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, Tim, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on and we've talked about hosting this great series on the Neuro Invisible is about your personal story. And so I'd love for you to share about your personal story with the Neuro Invisible.
Well, my personal story starts out as I had no clue that I had any difference about me. I was actually diagnosed at age 54. So I went through the great majority of my life having no idea, certainly recognizing I wasn't quite the same as everybody else. But truthfully, I chalked it up to the world was stupid and I wasn't. Not the best, necessarily the best operating, way to look at things, but kind of spit the facts when you didn't know any difference. When I was diagnosed at 54, I dove into this, and it was autism that I was diagnosed with, and dove deep into it. For those of you familiar with autism, one of the common things with autism is what referred to as special interests, where whatever it is you're interested in, you just, go into that to the exclusion of virtually everything else in the world. And autism became my special interest. And I was, through a crazy chain of events, lucky enough to get invited to, it was the second ever Autism at Work conference put on by the big global software company, SAP. And that got me where I met, all the leaders and such that were really promoting. At the time, it was just referred to as Autism at Work. Now, all the programs have recognized there's more than autism. They're now generally neurodiversity, at work. So got greatly involved with that. And I don't know, just was lucky to meet the right people, be at the right places at the right times, and, had the opportunity to speak to, huge number of companies, big and small, global and local, on the boards of a number of different organizations, have, presented at a variety of colleges, including the Ivy League, which for me is kind of I always enjoy that because I'm actually a community college dropout. So I say you can't drop out anything lower except for maybe junior college. So it's just kind of fun of, teaching at these colleges where they're paying big dollars to listen to a college dropout. So that's kind of the trajectory of how I learned about and got deeply involved in the neurodiversity arena. On the personal side, how did it work in my life? What was my life like? All of those good things, as is fairly common amongst autistic individuals who are, and nobody's agreed on what the right term is to use. So we'll use terms, and if you don't like that one, that's okay. You can just plug in your own term, and that's fine. If I was talking to you and you used a different term, I would be happy to use that term with you, even though I may use a different term elsewhere. So this is one of the interesting things because it is evolving quickly. So the terminology is evolving pretty quickly
Well,
too.
as you well know, that's why the series is on the Neuro Invisible, right? And so that
Right.
way we can really talk about the terms. And I want you to go into a little bit later here. We'll talk about kind of some of the evolution of some of the terms, where they came from, and what do they mean. Obviously, you can look up the definitions. They all say they mean the same thing, but they're not necessarily. But back to your journey Obviously, you were diagnosed at 54. You said with autism. Um, you've been married. You've been married quite a while, and but when
Yep.
did you, as you look back, because I'm sure that's part of it, and did it start to make sense about that whole world of autism and on the Neuro Invisible?
Yeah, it definitely made sense. I've been married. It will be 40 years this November. So, when people say that autistic individuals don't have, long-term relationships or can't, have relationships that work, the answer is I know lots of long-term, relationships in autism. So, it's another one of the we'll say misunderstandings of autism. Career-wise, I had a trajectory that was very common for people who are autistic that are in the working world. Obviously, autism is a spectrum. It covers a real wide range from people that are very highly impacted and do need full-time support of some types. Often they have comorbidities. And comorbidity is just fancy term for something that frequently occurs along with. So it's not actually what the condition is. It's just something that is frequently somewhat common with that. So when you get somebody who's very impacted, profound and severe is one terminology they use for that. There's often intellectual disability involved also. Again, intellectual disability is not part of autism. It's just kind of common or more prevalent, let's say, than it is for somebody who's not autistic. So obviously at that end of the spectrum, most people need a lot of support. They're probably not going to be out in the working world and, maintaining careers. But you go all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, again, terminology, once upon a time, it was called high functioning autism, but that one, as far as to the medical world, is not used anymore. That was another time, there's actually a specific diagnosis that was called Asperger's. And Asperger's really was a diagnosis very much focused on that person who was quite capable and functional, but had challenges in social and communication interactions, which is really the definition of autism. So, I'm more towards that end of being relatively competent, I guess. But what's kind of common in that range is you have ups and downs in your career. You're capable, you're competent. Having those special interests means that you tend to really focus in on what you're doing, which means you tend to excel at what you do. But then those social and communication things and not really understanding the whole social interaction and pecking order and such, particularly in larger companies, and you get in trouble and you get fired. That's a very common thing to happen. Just a kind of a little, how one of those might work. I was working at a company and the CTO had hired a quote expert to build a data warehouse, and they definitely needed a data warehouse. Well, I was hired to implement their design. And it became quite obvious to me within a week or two, this person did not know what they were talking about. They were a fraud. So I thinking that the thing you're supposed to do as being a worker, for a company is you're supposed to like say, hey, well, there's a problem over here. We need to get it taken care of. And totally missed the point that the CTO was relatively new. I didn't factor that in. And he was very uh, conscious of his image. I didn't factor that in. So he looked at it as my image is going to be wrecked if I admit the expert that I hired that I've bragged about is a fraud. So it's easier just to get rid of the messenger. So those kind of things. I mean, you're doing what seems to be like the right thing to do, but again, when you weigh all those social factors in, you can then understand, now I understand why he reacted the way he did, because it made him look bad. Had nothing to do with whether it was going to make the project succeed. It had to do with his image. But as humans, that is something that many, many humans consider, one of the most important things is how they're perceived, how they're viewed. So went through a variety of careers. Started in the world of bicycles as the lowest job you could ever have, sweeping floors and taking bikes out of boxes and taking the wrapping off. That was, about my skill level. And ended up in that, going through to the point of working into finally managing stores and then chains of stores and then wholesale and then designing bikes and doing import supply chain and doing, national sales teams, and got fired again, which, put me back into the job market and went through what I say are the world's crappiest jobs I ever had. To talk about those at another time. I never quite know which one was the crappiest, but at a given moment, you know, but you do what you have to keep, keep the family together and pay the, mortgage and all that stuff. But I finally got into IT through a crazy scenario. My wife was in telecom, a lot like you are, and back when Denver was a boom town for telecom. And it was at a Christmas party. We were leaving, and my wife grabbed a programmer and said, "My husband likes computers, and what should he do to get into the field?" And yes, the computers were my special interest at the time. So yes, I had a full network on Windows 3.1 or Windows 3.2, Windows for Workgroups. So for those of you who are old, about Windows for Windows for Workgroups and that stuff. And for those of you who are new, it did work, but let's just say that. And they told me, what to do. They said, go get certified in Microsoft particular career area. I did, and suddenly I had a career in the IT industry, and I've been there now for, geez, I hate to think how many years. It's coming up like 30 years that I've been in the IT industry now. And again, the same kind of thing, done really well, ran a CTO of a company, got fired, eventually became an independent consultant, specializing in very at-risk data projects, which is a great thing if you have troublesome career, because I always worked for my own company. So on the resume, I worked for the same company. I just had different clients. So it really covers up the fact that, some of these clients you left because the project finished. Some of them you left because of other reasons. Um, and eventually ended up at a company back as an employee again. Don't know why, but I don't know. I just took the company, seemed cool, and it was an employee deal, not a consulting deal. Joined them, and I don't know, year and a half, something like that in, they had a all hands and told us all that one of the most major tech companies in the world was buying us, and we were going to become employees of that tech company. So that's the career trajectory. So I guess it shows a couple things that um, having a variety of what your career paths are, and the career paths not being this continuous step, moving up in the same area, is very common amongst, and I personally use the term neurodistinct. We'll get, into those
Yeah.
more.
So, what's exciting about that is we actually, IDA just launched a new program called STEAM Ideas,
Right.
which is about, it's that invisible disabilities education awareness support, but it's really STEAM is science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And we have a great professional, and you happen to be one of those professionals where we talk about that area. And so you've been in that world, and we're pretty excited about that piece as well. Back to the Neuro Invisible. So I've heard all these terms, right? There's neuro differences, neuro distinct, neurodivergent, neuro
Neurospacey.
diversity, right? So all these different terminologies, right? So if you can kind of talk about those, as well as what makes up neuro invisible. You mentioned autism, and we all know that autism probably is kind of the start. It's the big one on the block in a sense. But what else makes up that whole neuro invisible world as well?
Well, I think we have to look at it really from where did it start? How did this come about happening? And there was a woman in Australia named Judy Singer, and Judy's still around. I once in a while, deal and communicate with Judy. But she wrote a honor thesis paper for, I don't know, whatever level degree, whether it was master's or PhD or, whatever level you do that. Australian education system is a little different in their terminologies than US education. But nonetheless, she wrote this thing, and she She wrote about essentially a social movement that involved people who just thought and perceived differently and talked a lot about her own family. And it's really funny. There was nowhere in that paper does it say neurodiversity or any of the other terminologies, but it really was the whole concept of what neurodiversity was about. And she is autistic, and a lot of her family was. So it was really written around the autism and autistic perspective. There was then some I don't know, journalist, I don't remember, who used the term neurodiversity to describe what this paper was about. Um, but the thing grew. It went past being autism to the point of neurodiversity really just means that like normal diversity. It's normal. There's males, there's females, there's like people like light skin, there's people with dark skin, there's people with blonde hair, there's people with curly hair with straight hair. I mean, people vary all over the place, and we think that nothing of it. That's just normal, normal variation in humans. So the idea in neurodiversity is that our brains vary just as much as all these other things that we look at as outward markers. And as our brains vary, it's going to cause us to perceive, process, and think differently. Now, the medical world has assigned tags to some of those ways of perceiving and processing and thinking, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, on and on. Um, but there's also people who obviously perceive, process, and think differently. They don't fit those tags. We just call them weird people. But they obviously, just don't see the world quite the way that a lot of other people do, which is a good thing. If we all saw the world the exact same way, it'd be kind of a boring world. Um, so the idea of neurodiversity has grown to really mean that all humans, so it's not that there's the neurodiverse group separately. Neurodiversity is all humans, just like diversity is all humans. I mean, as white males, we're not part of diversity. We are part. Many more people will say we're the problem in it, but nonetheless, we are part of diversity. Just like no matter how you think, whether it's the more accepted normal way or these ways that are considered different, you're part of neurodiversity. So that's the really the thought of neurodiversity is just there's a whole range that's normal. Now, when you start breaking it down, and this is kind of an evolution that happened as this idea has moved forward, and this is a social idea, not a medical idea. So you have these two ideas somewhat at odds at each other because the medical world wants to name and classify everything. The social idea is more people who are living this of we just want to be recognized that we're different and that doesn't mean we're wrong. And what difference does it matter what the medical world says about us? We recognize we have some differences in how we perceive and process. So as it went along, eventually the terminologies that came out, and one I think just about everybody agrees on. Now, nobody agrees what the definition is, and that's neurotypical. Neurotypical, again, nobody agrees what the real definition is, but generally it's the people who perceive, process, and think in a way that is considered the norm, which is really funny because if you go to different cultures and different countries and things like that, the norm is different. So, what is neurotypical? Again, it's this idea that there is a group that is somewhat um, more similar in the way they think and they tend to create the norms for society. Um, I personally think that there's probably less of them than most people think that there are. I think it's a very influential group, and they're able to get a lot of people who are likely not neurotypical, but to go along with them just because, if those are the norms at the company and you want to do well, I better somehow figure out how to fit in those norms. So now I get looked at like I'm neurotypical, even though I'm not, because I'm mimicking and such the norms. That's referred to masking quite often. Um, the other side is the one that has the real interesting part of the different names, like you mentioned. And again, the terminology is all over the place. The first word that came out was neurodivergent. And that was created by a activist up in the Pacific Northwest. And she created the terminology with the idea that it was supposed to bring people together. Now, I personally have a challenge with that because how does diverging, which means separating, bring people together? I'm still trying to figure that one out. So I personally came up and started using the term neurodistinct, which has become popular in quite a number of areas. And really just trying to say that we're not weird, we're not wrong, we're not divergent, which sounds to me like a negative thing. Um, we're just distinct. I mean, the way we are, the way we act, the way we communicate stands out distinctly from other people. And I think a lot of us want to, most people in the world probably want to be distinct in some way. I mean, their family, their career, their hobby. So I thought it was, it fit in with, I have some marketing background. So it fit in with the idea of like, let's position this so it sounds good, so it
Well,
is,
thinking about that whole issue, even of the neurodistinct, is this is one of the things we've been talking about with disabilities, which is our vision, which is invisible no more. And what that really is about is that uh, you talked about normative, and I always say the most abnormal people, they climb Mount Everest or run Ironman triathlons, right? The rest of us are normal. That's not normal to do those things, right?
yeah, right,
But I think about is that your disabilities, your neuros, your illnesses, all these things that make us unique. They're part of who we are, right?
right,
In other words, you may be left-handed, you have Crohn's disease and ADD, you're from Indiana or wherever. I mean, it's part of who you are versus that, being distinct or different. It's actually, we're all distinct and different in that sense, right? I mean, we're
right,
all, autism talks about that spectrum you brought up earlier, right? Well, there's a reason for that. Everybody is on a spectrum. Every illness and disability is on a spectrum, right?
right. I came up with a concept I called the neuro cloud to try and illustrate this. Because when you just put it in words, it's hard for everybody to get it because everybody interprets the words differently. And, that's just normal communication challenges. And if you're from a different culture, it's even harder, obviously. You work internationally with others just like I do. And, we know we have to be real careful to be very explicit because it's easy to be misunderstood in another culture. Um, so it comes down to the all these different terms really come down to what people are comfortable with and like themselves. If we want to get down to it, whether you call it neuro distinct or whether you call it neuro spicy or whether you call it neuro invisible, um, they're all meaning the same thing. And it really comes down to what does the person themselves identify and feel comfortable as, positioning as. Just like it is with many other disability areas. We had talked, before this a little bit about dealing with the deaf. The deaf. There's obviously rifts in the deaf groups amongst is it deaf? Is it hard of hearing? Is it hearing, impaired? Is it? And none of you can agree. So I just say this is the one I like to use. But if you tell me you like to use a different one, well, I'm happy to identify you with that different one. I want to respect your choice. But that doesn't mean I have to adopt your choice. I can adopt my choice and be respectful of your choice. And that's how I think it should be. But let's just say that it is still a area of contention over what's the right term. And I think the answer is the right term is the one that fits you, as long as we make sure that everybody understands whether it's this term, or this term, we're really talking about those people who, by classification of really the ADA here in America and other countries, it's other laws, would be considered as having a disability due to their cognitive condition. Which term you use, I mean, neuro invisible is kind of a nice one because it fits in with obviously, invisible disabilities. And it really does talk about the fact that these neuro conditions, which are legally disabilities, are truly invisible. Often they're misinterpreted the wrong way. a common misinterpretation, for instance, autism. And we deal with a lot of different conditions, but being autistic, that's the one I know the best. Um, we tend to be very direct and just get, right to the point without necessarily all of the normal social niceties around something. Um, so that often ends up being, we're considered as being, the word that starts with A and ends with whole. We're being considered those because of just being so direct. On the other hand, when you're working in the technical fields and you're working on technical things, often just getting to the point is much more effective than dancing around about, oh, that project you did yesterday was so great, and oh, you do things so good, but we have a problem over here. But on the other hand, you're really good at things, and what am I supposed to do now? I'm confused, as opposed to just addressing the issue.
Well, I wanted to, back to the whole issue of neuro invisible and why we even use the term invisible disabilities, because term disability, as you mentioned, well, I see right now you're wearing glasses, right? Guess what? You have a vision disability. Um, what invisible disabilities is really trying to do, this whole way of changing the way the world sees disabilities, is that disabilities are a technical scientific name. It's not
Right.
a you're a lesser person, you're done something wrong, this is what our mission is helping people understand that that's not the case. It's really, and so, because I know some people are like, oh, I don't have a disability. Well, a disability means that it impacts some function of your life, and you need some case it's an assistive device or some brain training or some medicine or something that allows you to operate differently, right, than where
Right.
you're at. And so that's a big part of it. Is we want to be clear about that. We're really about how important value people are, right? And that it's
Right.
you're unique, and we love the fact that you're unique about you and those things.
I think it comes down to people get, I will say, confused between a disability and disabled.
Yeah.
And often the assumption is if you have a disability, you're disabled. Now, part of that is because in the legal environment, many disabilities do fall under, the Americans with Disability Act, which then is considered, or again, whatever country, other countries have very similar laws, different name, but similar concept. People then think of that as being disabled. But you can have a disability, like you say, glasses. I mean, how many people wear glasses, which is obviously a disability? I need something in order to be able to see at the same level that people that can't, don't need glasses. But if you give me the glasses, am I any less capable of doing things than the people that don't? And the answer is no. So while it's a disability, it's not disabling.
Right.
Um,
Well, and yeah, and that's one of the terms we always define, is really to define the difference between the two. Because we've seen the term disability where people capitalize the A and stuff. That's because we've misapplied it, right? We've said something that's different than it really is. And by the way, people who are disabled are not bad either. We think
no,
of that
no,
too.
not
We
at
think, oh,
all.
they're not productive, so something's not working right. But as I like to say, they may be unable to do a thing, and unable is not a bad thing either. And we need to work through this. So, back to this neuro, let's go think about the neuro invisible again. So tell me, what is the benefit of it? Is a diagnosis, right? It's what it is. It's a diagnosis. I'm sure you can self-diagnose. There's some diagnose out on the internet. I'm sure you get it. But what is the benefit of finding out that these neuroinvisible things that you live with, that are part of what makes you up, makes you unique? What is the benefit of finding those out, and how does that also impact your family? I mean, you talked about that earlier with your wife. What was the benefit of that in your marriage, right? Of finally figuring out, oh, I have autism. Now things make sense, and maybe I can do something different, or do something just to understand better.
Yeah, when we talk about the neurodistinct or neuroinvisible, or however we want to term it, we're talking about a huge range of medical conditions. And again, it's kind of crazy because we're saying they're medical conditions, but it's really a social construct of looking at this group as being a unique group that is intersectional across any other way you can divide groups. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're male, whether you're female, whether you're, Caucasian, whether you're Aboriginal, whether you're black. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can have any of these conditions. Um, but we're really trying to look at it as a social thing, not as a medical thing. But the medical terminologies, autism is obviously one, is where it came from. But it's the funny part is it's actually one of the smallest numbers as far as percentage wise that fall in that group. But it is the one most identified because it was the foundation of it. But ADHD is a very, very common area that is also considered dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. I mean, all different ways that the brain perceives and processes in a different manner than typical. Um, the advantage of getting a diagnosis is, as I mentioned when we began, my working concept prior to being diagnosed was the world was stupid. I mean, it's not kind and courteous, but, on the other hand, I am autistic. So, we just get down to the point. And the point was they just didn't seem to catch on like I did. So, what else do you assume if you don't know there's any reason behind why there's a difference other than, well, they're just not quite as quick as you are? Again, obviously not a really, really good operating perspective when you want to, create interactions and relationships and build careers and such, to just assume everybody's stupid. But, that's where I was at. So when I found out I was autistic, and this is true whether you find out whether it's ADHD and, maybe you've just never been able to really just pull it together. I mean, you have problems, studying when you were in school, you have problems in getting organized, you have problems in getting started on a project, organizing the project. Those are all kind of ADHD traits that ADHD is like autism. They don't call it ADHD spectrum, but the reality is some people highly impacted, some people, far less so. Um, but if you don't know anything about that, my wife, for instance, was diagnosed ADHD, and she was probably about 58 or so when she was diagnosed. So after I was diagnosed, and it suddenly made sense that, why her career and life has gone the way it has gone because of ADHD. In school, and this is one of the interesting things about a lot of these conditions, is they tend to present differently in males versus females. A lot like heart attacks, present differently in males versus females quite often. So males tend to get caught with ADHD pretty young because more common ADHD in males has them hyperactive and bouncing around, and they're being disruptive in school, and obviously that gets identified quickly. Whereas for females, they tend to be more classified as being dreamers. They're just kind of like not not interested in what's going on, so their mind's off somewhere else. But that's not disruptive, so it doesn't get identified. But what we're seeing now is huge amounts of females that weren't identified that are going now, whether they're in their 30s or their 40s, and life keeps getting more complicated. There's kids, there's career. We're all juggling more things than we used to, and they just can't, they can't handle it anymore because they don't know why, and then they find out it's ADHD. Well, we can do something about that. There, for that particular condition, there are medications that help a lot of people. But even if you don't have the medication, just understanding this is why I have these challenges makes all the difference in the world, as opposed to blaming the challenges on the rest of the world, which, I think that's human nature. It's not me that's the problem, it's the world that's the problem, right? But once you recognize that, no, I'm not really a problem, I'm different. And it's that interface of how can I interface with the world now that I understand that difference.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Right. So it's like with any illness, when you find something out, the diagnosis, now you know what to do, right? Maybe it's a treatment, maybe it's an interaction, maybe it's a learning or retraining. We do know nowadays you can teach an old dog new tricks, right? Through the brain, you can
Right?
do some really cool brain training and different things. learn how to interact. I know that you had to do that some yourself on how do you interact with people. You took some vocal coaching and different things that helped improve some of the things where maybe your interaction was a little bit rough for people, and you're like, okay, well, how do I change that up, right? How do I? But so I'm real excited about that, and we're
You
real
know,
excited about
let
these.
me just speak on that one for a
Yeah,
second, because
absolutely.
that was one that uh, I would say my vocal coach saved my marriage, which probably to most people sounds pretty weird. How does a vocal coach save your marriage? And the reality is, autistic individuals tend to, and again, not all of them, but there's a tendency to have a very monotone speaking level. So there's not a lot of emotionality in the speaking. And my wife tells me that I had an edge to my voice. And ADHD is tends to be a very emotionally related condition. So particularly when in women, probably more so than men, or that might just deal with the fact that we're just oblivious to our emotions, and women are just better at recognizing it. Nobody knows at this point. It's whatever, fill in the theory you like. But she's what she would tell me is my voice, just the sound and tone of my voice was just like pinning her against the wall. It just made her set her on edge, uh, right away. So where it really saved my marriage was, my vocal coach taught me how to speak in a manner that I call it emotional speaking, which is how most people speak anyways, but some of us don't recognize that we don't do that. And he changed the octave range I spoke in, and he got me to add more melody into my speaking, and got rid of that harsh edge on my speaking tones. And that made a huge difference because now my wife wasn't feeling this high anxiety every time I talked. She was now much more open to communication. So it is something that made a huge, huge difference for me. And obviously, I do a lot of speaking nowadays at companies all over and such. So it was also been a huge, huge benefit there, learning how to engage people from an emotional standpoint, which as an autistic, that is something that I don't really connect with because I don't have to be engaged emotionally for us to have a good discussion. But I now understand that most people need to feel the engagement in order for it to be impactful. So it
Oh,
is
that's great.
interesting. I've learned to make them feel that, but coming back, I don't pick it up. But that's okay. The important part is for the communication to work. They have to feel the connection.
Well, we're so excited here for you to join us as our host of this whole Neuro Invisible series. It's our Super Brain Idea Season 3. Um, uh, and the 2 seasons are up right now on Invisible Disabilities Television. People can go see those. Some incredible speakers talking about all kinds of different aspects of the brain, disorders, and brain therapy and brain health, those things. We're excited about that. And we're excited about the future of this Neuro Invisible series. So I know we're going to look at some different, a whole bunch of different topics and subjects and stuff. You want to just share a little bit about what we're going to look forward to on the series?
Definitely. We don't want to get this stuck into a rut that's boring. This really is intended to be. I like to look at it as having personal conversations with people that are involved in all different ways with the Neuro Invisible group. Um, but more like you're kind of eavesdropping in just a personal conversation that we're having together. And, the group can cover a huge range of things. There's everything from the corporate leaders that are promoting and running neurodiversity, inclusion and hiring programs. So we'll have people like that. We'll have people who are, from the academic world that are studying these conditions and trying to understand how it all fits in and fits together and how to make it work better in the education world, in the job world. And many of them actually do have some type of neuro invisible condition themselves. We'll be talking to parents of that have kiddos that have neurovisible conditions. We'll be talking to complete families of, or maybe just the parents of the families, but many of these conditions are highly hereditary. So it's not uncommon for the family to, I mean, my family is an example, looking back in retrospect. I have three brothers. I would say two definitely, one maybe are likely on the autism spectrum. And my mother, for sure, was on the autism spectrum. And my dad, high probability. Um, but, we grew up in a different era. And, at that point, we lived on a farm and, didn't have to socialize with a whole lot of people. And it worked for us. Um, but modern society, it's a lot more challenging for those families, especially if the parents don't understand that they actually have this condition that they're dealing with their kid. And they do change as you get older. The how it shows up as a kid shows a little different than how it shows up as an adult. But again, if you don't recognize you have it, it makes it more challenging to deal with. So really the whole spectrum, everything from academic, from the corporate career kind of side, people who are even doing other nonprofits that are involved in helping people prepare and get into the job world. So huge range of essentially all different people that are involved from all different angles. So we're not trying to just stick with one perspective on it. We're really trying to give that holistic view of how does it work in the career world? How do the corporate world thinking about it? How do parents deal with it? How do parents learn to understand how to deal with it? We'll deal with other, individuals who are neuro invisible themselves of maybe they knew while they were growing up as a kid, maybe they recognized later, but how they worked through it and how they dealt with it. So
Well,
that's
this is
kind of it. Basically, anybody that fits in there somehow intersecting with neuro invisible, we want to get that perspective because the more perspectives we have, the better everybody can understand and relate to the group.
Yeah, we're very excited about it. And people will be able to learn more at invisibledisabilities.org as well as neuroinvisible.org. We'll be putting up, upcoming episodes and links to the previous episodes. We're very excited about you being the host and sharing your expertise in this whole area of neuroinvisible. And thank you so much for being part of this, Tim.
Well, just so excited to be doing this. You've always been doing great things, and certainly now the cognitive area has become just much more recognized, and so glad to see you're embracing it and bringing it under that umbrella of just because you can't see some difference doesn't mean that it's not really there.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.